Cemetery, where US President Donald Trump is paying tribute to those who lost their lives during the First World War on today, the centenary of the end of that conflict, one of the bloodiest and most gruesome in the history of humankind. We're expecting to hear from Trump shortly, although he has been heavily criticized on social media today for not attending yesterday's events due to bad weather. But he's there now, and we're expecting to hear from him shortly at the American Cemetery, originally a World War I cemetery. It now shelters remains of US dead from both World Wars, both World War I and World War II, and contains some 1,541 graves of those who died in the First World War, and 24 unknown dead of the Second World War. So Trump there, looking rather somber on this very poignant occasion, marking 100 years since the end of a war that caused the deaths of 20 million, the destruction of hundreds of thousands of homes, businesses. And it was on this day, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, that Armistice was signed in a quiet forest clearing in Compiègne, in a train carriage by Supreme Allied Commander Ferdinand Foch and German diplomats, bringing an end to the guns that had been chattering for 4 years since the beginning of the First World War. Emmanuel Macron has been welcoming world leaders all day today to Paris, where a special memorial event was held at the Arc de Triomphe, featuring a number of performances, readings, speeches, in which Macron called for unity and remembrance on this day of reflection.
Color guard, post the colors.
France was, of course, one of the focal points of much of the fighting during World War I. And President Macron has visited a number of battlefields across the country in the run-up to today's events. Trump, however, arrived this weekend, but as I said, was criticized fairly heavily. Yesterday, Macron and Merkel, among others, paid a visit to a cemetery to honor the dead. However, due to the inclement weather, Trump decided to stay indoors. America, of course, did not begin combat operations in the war until roughly 1917, when it declared war on Germany after unrestricted submarine warfare against the US by the German Empire. It's known as one of the most bloody, most gruesome conflicts in the history of warfare. The war that was meant to end all wars, it was called at the time, remembered particularly for the employment of trench tactics and the introduction of the tank to the battlefield. Now, the US lost some 50,000 men in combat, and estimates put the number of total deaths of military personnel at some 10 million people. Stirring renditions there of both the Marseillaise and the American national anthem before Trump, who has been wandering around the Suresnes American Cemetery for war dead just outside Paris. Now we're about to hear.
Good afternoon. I invite you to pray with me, please. Almighty, holy, and merciful God, as we gather today, we humbly ask you to grace this ceremony. We reverently remember those warriors of our nations who, on the battlefields of the First World War, died a century ago to secure our liberty today. For those who here walked through the valley of the shadow of death, remain their eternal shepherd, and grant them even now rest in your kingdom, counting with grace their final sacrifice in defense of liberty. Make us worthy of their offering, and renew in us an unshakable determination to daily live out the ideals for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. With thankful and hope-filled hearts, inspire us by our sacred fallen to a new determination to ever defend justice, peace, and freedom. Interceding for your people, these petitions I offer to you, our great Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Amen.
Please be seated. Please welcome the Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission, the Honorable William Matz.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the American Battle Monuments Commission World War I Centennial Ceremony. It is indeed an honor for me to be with you today on the 100th anniversary of the signing of the armistice that ended World War I, and to extend a particularly warm welcome to our President, President Donald J. Trump, and to our many distinguished guests. We also welcome the descendants of two of our soldiers who are resting here. Heather Ewing, family member of First Lieutenant George W. Ewing, Jr., and First Lieutenant Louis R. Ewing. And Mr. Rick Redmond, family member of Private Frederick Redmond. We are indeed honored by your presence.
Well, while we wait for
the mission of the American Battle
Donald
Monuments
Trump
Commission
here, we are going to Paris,
the honor,
where the new
the service,
peace forum
the sacrifice
has begun,
of the United States
and
Armed
Angela
Forces.
Merkel is speaking.
Et en remerciant la chancelière Merkel
Just
et
after
le secrétaire
Emmanuel
général
Macron,
Guterres pour leur présence et leurs mots, et je leur cède la parole. Merci à vous.
Waiting now for Angela Merkel to begin speaking at the Paris Peace Forum, which describes itself as neither a summit nor a conference, an annual event based on a simple idea, international cooperation.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren Ministerpräsidenten, Exzellenzen, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Wir haben heute Morgen, und ich glaube, ich sage das im Namen aller, in einer bewegenden Zeremonie der Tatsache,
We're just having a little trouble with our translation here. If you bear with us, we will have that sorted in a moment.
die Nachricht von einem Waffenstillstand an der Westfront
Angela Merkel, who's in Paris
to
celebrate 100 years since the end of the war. She says, 100 years ago, the news about the armistice became something that soldiers celebrated. For this war, they had to create a new word in France. And Britain, in Britain, they call it the Great War, because he went over everything that was happening in the world before. At the beginning of this war, there was propaganda about a fast victory, and at the end there were 17 million dead people. How could it happen that among countries who talked about themselves in terms of enlightenment, technical progress was used, gas and submarines were used without any shame, principles of civilizations had been disregarded. Germany was beaten, but we all lost, as General de Gaulle said. This senseless war shows where national and international overestimation and military overestimation will lead to. The disastrous results were speechless and criticlessness. We look back today, 100 years ago today, on this war, and we remember the victims, we remember the women, we remember the children, we remember the soldiers who fell at the front. And therefore, I'm very grateful to you, Emmanuel Macron. We can't. We have to march forward. We can't stand. We have to march forward. We all have been asked to donate a book for the Library of Peace. I decided to donate Peter Corvert's book, in which she writes about her two sons, one who died quite early in the First World War, and her desperate hope that her second son would survive the slaughter. And she writes, why do these young people have to die? And only the old can survive. The fact that I stand today for you as the Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, and it's a great honor for me, and I'm thankful to President Macron for also for what happened yesterday, because in Campagne, where the armistices were signed, there was a plaque talking about the arrogance of Germany. Now there is a plaque remembering Germany and the friendship with France. And that is something very great that has changed. Especially after the sorrow that Germany brought over the world in the last century. It reminds us that something that we take for granted today should not be taken for granted. And we have to work for it every day. And because of that, I would like to talk about my own fears today. I'm afraid of the re-establishment of nationalism, where we may come to ignore our interactions and interdependence. We see that our European peace project is being questioned, and we see that it is that people try to enforce their interests by force. Last year, we had 222 armed conflicts in the world. According to the UNHCR, 86.5 million people became refugees. That's more than the population of France. And it's even more challenging if we see who is affected by these conflicts. More than 500 million children, more than 50% of the refugees are children. Some children are abused as child soldiers. And if we believe that we have to draw conclusions and learn from history, then that makes us speechless. Even if you look at the pictures in front of you, it shouldn't make us speechless. It shouldn't make us look away. That's also a lesson of history. We must not accept armed conflicts wherever they are in the world, no matter how far away. No population, no nation, not a single person must be written off by us. Therefore, we have to work for a political solution in Syria. Some groups are trying to do this, but they didn't find it together. But they are trying. We met in Istanbul with the Turkish and the French and the Russian president to enhance these works. There's a long road before us in Syria, but we should not give up. And while we come here together today and remember today, we should remember that there is the largest monetary crisis happening humanitarian crisis that's happening to the world at the moment. And we do not have enough pictures of that. It prevents us from being shocked. The pictures must not make us speechless and must not stop us from thinking about these conflicts. So we have to work for a ceasefire in the Yemen. There was one way enter into the conflict in 1914 that led into this conflict was the speechlessness, was the lack of dialogue. We talked about sleepwalking into this war. It was one of the reasons why we went into this conflict. And that was a conclusion that then US President Woodrow Wilson drew from that conflict. And he suggested in his 14 theses a broad body that should prevent further conflict. And they created the League of Nations, and we noticed how it failed. We noticed how Germany started the Second World War and started the breach of civilization. After that, nothing was like before, and it was not supposed to be like it was before. And the answer was the creation of the United Nations, the family of nations created a framework for cooperation, which was later put into words in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was written down 70 years ago. And I ask you, if we nowadays would have to write down the Universal Declaration of Human Rights today, would we be able to do this? I fear we would not. Therefore, we have to develop what has been created by the destruction of the Second World War. And I know it's difficult. We have created a universal aggregation and prohibition of armed forces, of armed conflicts. We have to develop that. We know that the United Nations are left behind the idea that they have made themselves. But is that a reason to say that we would live better without the United Nations? And I tell you no. I tell you, we can destroy institutions quickly, but to rebuild them is not as fast
Und wir alle
possible.
wissen doch, was uns
We all
heute
know
herausfordert,
what
was uns gefährdet.
are challenges
Das können
of
wir in
today
den allermeisten Fällen eben
that
nicht
endanger us
national,
today.
sondern nur noch gemeinsam lösen.
But we cannot
Und deshalb müssen wir uns zu dieser Gemeinsamkeit bekennen.
deal with that
Daher
nationally,
verdienen Sie,
but only as a common
sehr
body.
geehrter Herr Generalsekretär,
Therefore,
Antonio
we
Guterres,
have to do this
jede
as a community.
Unterstützung.
And therefore,
Jede Unterstützung
you,
für das,
Honourable
was Sie im
Secretary
täglichen
General
Alltag tun,
Guterres,
genauso wie für die Reform der
deserve
Vereinten
our
Nationen.
support for
Wir müssen
everything.
den
What you do in your
Präventionsgedanken nach
day-by-day
vorne
work
stellen.
and
Wir müssen
also
verhindern, dass
in your
Konflikte entstehen.
ideas of a
Dafür ist die
reform of the
Agenda
United Nations.
2030 mit den 17 globalen
We have to
Nachhaltigkeitszielen
prevent
ein guter
conflict.
Wegweiser.
And a good
Und wir
way,
wissen, dass wir
a good
Armut und
signpost
Hunger
for this
bekämpfen müssen, wenn
is
wir Frieden wollen.
the
Wir wissen,
Global
dass wir
Agenda
Zugang zu
2013.
Bildung schaffen müssen, dass wir die Natur schützen müssen und
We know
dass
that we have to create
wirtschaftliche und
access to
soziale
education.
Gerechtigkeit stärken.
We have to protect our environment.
Wir wissen
We
in
have to
Deutschland
create
um diese
economic and social
Herausforderung und
justice.
wollen uns 2 Jahre lang als nicht
We in
ständiges
Germany
Mitglied des UN-Sicherheitsrates an dieser
take these
Agenda
challenges,
mitarbeiten zu können.
and we are happy
Erste
that we
Weltkrieg
can,
hat uns
as a
gesagt,
non-permanent
in
member
welches Verderben
of the
Isolationismus
Security Council,
führt.
participate
Und wenn
in the
Abschottung
implementation
vor
of
100
those
Jahren schon
goals.
keine Lösung war, wie könnte
We
sie das
have
heute sein?
seen
In einer vielfach vernetzten Welt
how
mit 5-mal
cutting
so
off
vielen Menschen
each
auf der
country
Welt wie damals.
from the community
Und deshalb haben wir für unser G20
led into the disaster of the First
das
World
Motto
War.
genommen, eine vernetzte Welt gestalten.
So the lesson
Wir werden auch eng
is
mit
that
der
we should not repeat that mistake
französischen
today.
zusammenarbeiten, um
So our
diesen
decision
Gedanken auch voranzubringen. Eine
as
enge
leader
internationale Arbeit.
presiding over the
Auf der
20 group of
Grundlage
G20 group of
gemeinsamer Werte, wie
nations,
sie uns die UN-Charta
we
vorgibt.
want to create
Das
networks
ist die
among
einzige
the countries.
Möglichkeit, die Schrecken der
Cooperation,
Vergangenheit zu überwinden und eine
as
vernünftige
implied by the
Zukunft
United
zu gestalten.
Nations, is
Meine Damen
the
und Herren,
only
liebe
way
Freunde,
that we can
wir
step
Deutschen
over
haben erlebt,
the problems of the
den
past
Schrecken, die wir mit
and
dem
look
Zweiten
forward
Weltkrieg
into
vor
a
allen Dingen
better
angerichtet
future.
haben.
Ladies and
Dass
gentlemen,
uns die Hand zur
we in
Versöhnung
Germany have seen
dass man der jungen Bundesrepublik
that after
damals viel Vertrauen
the
entgegenbrachte.
evils
Und so
that
wurde
Germany
der Weg
brought
von
on the
uns in die
world
Weltgemeinschaft
during the
überhaupt
Second World
ermöglicht.
War.
Und ein Kern davon
And
war
we
die
noticed that
deutsch-französische
afterwards,
Freundschaft.
people reached out to us
Das haben wir
and were prepared to fully,
mutigen Frauen und Männern zu verdanken.
and we remembered
Robert Schuman, Jean Monnet, Konrad Adenauer.
France
Sie haben den
with France,
Weg
with Schuman,
geebnet,
and
alte Rivalitäten
Monnet
hinter
and-
sich zu lassen und auf ein
they paved the way to give up old rivalries and create
zu den eigenen
new
Menschen zu gehen, wenn man
cooperation
politische Verantwortung trägt und zu sagen,
and
ich muss einen Kompromiss machen.
an equality
Aber
between nations.
Kompromisslosigkeit ist der sichere Weg in einen großen.
It is difficult to go to your own people and say we have to make a compromise, but it is worthwhile because that is the step to peace.
Ich möchte an Wladislaw Bartoszewski aus
And I would
Polen
also
erinnern,
point out
der sich schon
that
vor
others were
Kriegsende
prepared to
1945
reconcile
über eine
with us.
künftige Verständigung zwischen Polen und Deutschen
I would like
gedacht
to
haben.
mention
Heute sind wenige Vertreter aus Polen unter uns, weil sie heute
Bartoszewski,
den 100.
who-
Jahrestag ihrer Unabhängigkeit feiern.
who
Mit dem
even before the
Ende
end of
des
the
Ersten
Second World
Weltkriegs
War
oder eher der Wiedererlangung
reached his hand
ihrer
in reconciliation to Germany.
Unabhängigkeit, weil sie weit über 100 Jahre geteilt waren.
Today there aren't many Polish people amongst us because
Viel zu
they
lange
celebrate
konnten
the
Menschen in Europa
100th
an dem
anniversary of their
Friedensprojekt nicht
independence,
so
the
teilhaben.
re-establishment
Der
of their
Kalte Krieg hatte sie
Independence Day,
getrennt.
after having
Aber
been partitioned by
Es ist
Germany
heute so, dass
and
wir gerade
Prussia.
auch in Europa die Erfahrung gemacht haben, auch wieder zusammen zu sein, wir Deutsche ganz besonders. Ich möchte Emmanuel Macron und den Initiatoren dieses Friedensforums danken,
I would
dass
like
wir
to
nicht
thank
nur
Emmanuel
Politiker sind,
Macron and the
sondern dass hier
people who
Nichtregierungsorganisationen,
who prepared
Verbände,
this
Vereinigungen,
peace forum.
Forscher, Bürgerinnen und Bürger mitmachen.
But we are here not only as politicians, but we are joined by ordinary people,
Frieden muss
by
erarbeitet
scientists,
werden von den Menschen in unserem
by
Land.
NGOs.
Und deshalb
Because
ist die
peace is nothing
Friedensarbeit
simple.
so
It's something that has to be
Und
worked
deshalb
for
danke
and
ich ganz
created
herzlich,
by the people.
dass dies keine
So
Eintagsfliege ist,
peace
wie wir in
work
Deutschland sagen würden,
is enormously
sondern dass dies ein Prozess
complicated.
ist, dass aus diesem 100. Jahrestag
And
des
I'm grateful that
Waffenstillstands nach dem Ersten Weltkrieg
out of this
ein Prozess für mehr
100th
Frieden.
anniversary of the Armistice
Ich mache mir keine Illusionen,
becomes
dass es ein
a
komplizierter
process
Weg ist.
of more
Aber wenn
peace.
wir alle daran glauben, dass wir es gemeinsam
I do
anpacken
not
müssen,
have
dann haben wir eine Chance, eine bessere
the belief
Welt zu
that
gestalten.
this is
Und
an
die müssen
easy
wir
way,
nutzen, nach dem, was
but if
wir
we together
Herzlichen Dank.
work, then we have a chance to get to peace. That was Angela Merkel there, speaking at the Paris Peace Forum, a new forum designed to focus on international cooperation when it comes to conflict. And this is, as I say, a new forum set up this year, coinciding nicely with the 100th anniversary of the signing of Armistice. And it describes itself as neither a summit nor a conference. It aims to tackle global challenges and ensure durable peace. To support collective actions, it gathers all actors of global governance under one roof for 3 days. Today is the first of those 3 days, nicely coinciding with the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War.
Mourait à l'âge de 110 ans, le dernier combattant.
World leaders gather in Paris for a special memorial event to mark 100 years since the end of the First World War.